Hello everybody and welcome back to Vehicles of War Thunder. So, after doing the video on the Panzer II, I was trying to figure out what I want to do in the case of a British tank, and I kinda sorta realized that my original coverage of the A13, which only covered the Mark I, wasn't exactly that great, especially by modern standards, so I decided I want to remake that. I've also sort of rethought how I plan to do videos on vehicles that are fairly similar, especially when it comes to the tanks. So this video is actually going to cover both the Mark I and the Mark II. Also, though, things have actually changed quite a bit since I did that video in the case of the A13, because back then the A13 didn't have a round with an explosive filler. It was purely solid shot, and back then solid shot was even worse than it is today. I mean, it's still pretty bad today, to be completely honest with you, but it was really bad back then. So things are marginally better when it comes to solid shot, and the fact that you now have an armor-piercing round with an explosive filler is just a massive step up when it comes to being able to destroy enemy tanks without too much of a hassle. So, with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and hop into the history of the A13. In 1929, the father of the British tankette, Lieutenant Colonel Martel, or I guess technically Lieutenant Colonel Martel, favored a type of lightweight vehicle with a type of suspension that was refined by Carden Lloyd. However, this suspension did not quite match the needs of such a tank, namely the need to be both sturdy but also offer the best performance. A solution to this, however, would be found in the Christie Suspension, developed by the American engineer W.J. Christie, who in 1929 would design a race tank, marrying aspects of both an armored car and a tank. In 1936, as the Assistant Director of Mechanization at the War Office, Martel would follow the development of Christie's suspension and would attend in the USSR the first large-scale military maneuvers of tanks using this suspension. At the same time, he would be searching in the United Kingdoms for an engine that was comparable to the compact yet powerful Liberty radial engine. Eventually, the British government would authorize the purchase of a license to use the Christie suspension through the Neufeld organization, who would also provide the engine. Morris Commercial Cars would be put in charge of completely redesigning the hull, which was considered too small and narrow, and addressed many of the issues left with Christie's original design for the M1931. The newly designed vehicle, the A13 Cruiser Mark Iii, would be designated according to the new Army specifications, which in 1936 would be designed according to new Army specifications, which in 1936 called for a tank with a speed of 48 kilometers an hour, 30 millimeters of armor, and to use the standard 2-pounder or 40 millimeter gun. These requirements would be slightly modified later, with the speed being dropped down to just 40 kilometers an hour, and while I can't find a source for this, the armor requirement must have also been lowered, because all of my sources list the armor, at least for the A13 Mark I, as between 6mm and 14mm, depending upon where you're looking, and not the originally called for 30mm. The first prototype, the A13 E1, would be delivered in October 1937, with a production order for 50 Cruiser Mark IIIs following shortly thereafter. This would later be revised to 65. Deliveries would begin in December of 1938 and end in mid-1939. This model of the tank would weigh 14 long tons, be powered by the Neufeld Liberty V12 petrol engine, developing 340 horsepower, giving it a power-to-weight ratio of 24.3 horsepower per ton. It would also have a top speed of 48 kilometers an hour and a range of 140 kilometers. The only variant for the A13 Mark I was the standard close support version, which was equipped with a 96mm mortar firing smoke rounds. However, This would prove useless in real conditions, and so the crews would rush to replace the smoke rounds with high explosive shells. By the time production had ended, designs for a revised version with thicker armor and a sloped turret would be already underway. This revised tank would be designated as the A13 Mark II or Cruiser Mark IV. The biggest difference between the Mark I and Mark II is that the Mark II would achieve the originally called for 30mm of armor at the front of the hull, and would apply applique armor panels covering the sides and rear of the turret to create sloped armor. This sloping also makes it the easiest way to tell the difference between the Mark I and the Mark II. This additional armor would increase the weight of the A13 Mark II to 14.75 long tons. It would still use the same engine developing 340 horsepower, so this new tank would now have a power-to-weight ratio of 23.1 horsepower per ton. Originally, the Mark II would be equipped with the same Vickers water-cooled 303 machine gun, but due to constant trouble, it would be later replaced with the more reliable and compact 7.92mm Besa starting in 1940. In-game, they still have it using the 303 Vickers. The version with this new coaxial machine gun would be later known as the Mark IV-A, and would be the main and only variant of the A13 Mark II. In total, 665 A13 Mark IIs would be built until late 1940. In 1939, however, a close support version using the Mark II would be thought of, but would be later dropped as a result of the concept, again, not really working out in real combat. There would be a third variant of the A13 that would be completed and designed by LMS Railway, and would be known as the Mark V Covenator. This version would increase the armor to 40mm and use a new engine, the Meadows DAV Flat 12, developing 340 horsepower. Because of the additional weight of the vehicle, because of the additional armor, the weight of the vehicle would increase to 18 long tons, resulting in a power-to-weight ratio of 18.9 horsepower per ton. A total of 1,771 units of this model would be produced. However, due to engine overheating and fighting compartment ventilation problems, this model would be kept at home solely for training. Going into how the vehicles were when it came to their actual service record in combat, the A13 Mark I would first see action with the British Expeditionary Force's 1st Armored Division in May 1940. Many of these, however, would be lost during engagements with German armor due to their lack of protection, with the rest being abandoned at Dunkirk. Accounting for half of its force, some would be sent as part of the 7th Armored Brigade to Libya, where they would participate in Operation Crusader 1940 to 1941. Supposedly, some would also be transferred to Greece and be lost there. There are no known surviving vehicles. The A13 Mark II would also see its first action as part of the British Expeditionary Force. However, due to a lack of training, the first engagements with the Germans would go poorly, with around 100 being abandoned at and around Calais, some sabotaged and unrepairable, but others mostly intact that would fall into German hands. The ones that the Germans could repair would be renamed to Panzerkampfwagen Mark IV 744E, where the E signified the origin of the tank as English, and pressed into service for use during the next German campaigns, including Operation Barbarossa, where 9 would be used as command tanks for Panzer Abteilung Flamme 100, probably mispronounced that, that roughly translates to Flame Tank Battalion 100. The Mark IVAs would also see service in North Africa, including with the 7th Armored Division, until their replacement by the Crusader in the fall of 1941. Most would be lost to German anti-tank guns, but they would perform well against the lightly armored Italian and early German tanks, and would prove to be reliable and popular among the troops for their protection and speed. As mentioned previously, the A13 Mark III would only be used for training, but one would be destroyed by enemy action during a Luftwaffe air raid on Canterbury in May 1942. By By 1943, however, the General Staff would declare the model obsolete due to its poor protection and armament, and they would be scrapped en masse with the exception of those that were converted to bridge layers, which would see action by the Guards Armored Division and elements of the 1st Polish Armored Division in both Belgium and the Netherlands. My sources claim the Netherlands thing is 1943, but I think they mean 1944 because I'm pretty sure the British weren't in the Netherlands, at least, with armored troops. Or rather, I guess the Polish government in exile forces were not in the Netherlands in 1943 with British tanks. So I think my sources meant to say 1944. Now, as for how the tanks actually perform in-game, when I covered the A13 Mark I back in its original video, I had one major complaint with it, and that was the lack of a round with an explosive filler, especially since back then, solid shot was even worse than it is today, and as mentioned earlier, it's still pretty bad today, but back then, it was even worse. Now, all of these years later, now with all these years later, with the addition of a high explosive or an armor-piercing high explosive round, with sufficient penetration to go through most, if not all, enemies that you'll fight, including full up tiers, it's actually a really good reserve vehicle, having speed, at least when you're going forward. It's a British vehicle, so it has absolute craptastic reverse speed, because nobody told the British. Sometimes you need to be able to back up. You do have a stabilizer. It's not the greatest stabilizer ever, but it is a stabilizer, which not all reserve vehicles have. And even vehicles that you will fight that are not reserve vehicles sometimes will not have stabilizers. So that is a nice bonus. And then, of course, you have the lethal high explosive, the lethal APHE round that allows you to be a force to be reckoned with. As for the armor, it's okay for a low BR vehicle being enough to block all but 12.7mm or autocannons. This of course applies to both the A1 and the the A13 Mark I and the Mark II. If memory serves me correctly, the American 50 cals are able to pen like 31mm of armor at like point blank range against a flat 0-degree surface. Obviously, if you keep enemies back, you will not get penned by the 50 cals, the odd 50 cal that you'll run into. But because you'll be fighting the Germans fairly regularly, in particular, you can be killed with ease by their autocannons. They may not kill you in one shot, they may not kill you in one burst, depending upon exactly where they hit you. So you may be able to retaliate if you're lucky, especially if they don't take out your gunner. They probably will if they know where to aim, but nonetheless. Now, before we wrap this up, I do want to go ahead and mention, one of the clips I showed you in this video was a battle match on Kuban. And I do want to go ahead and note that my team did manage to somehow eke out a win by the skin of our teeth. My final score in that battle was 6,398 with 18 ground kills, 2 being from a plane, which I did not record because it's irrelevant to this video. And then 1 plane kill, that was also from the plane, as well as 3 assists. I was followed up on the scoreboard by Rubber Hot Dog with a score of 5,273, who had 12 ground kills to his name, 3 plane kills, and 2 assists. After that, however, there was a massive drop in score. Admittedly, the rest of the team is relatively close to one another in terms of score, but there is still a massive drop-off between Rubber Hot Dog and the guy in 3rd place, whose name I don't recall who it is. And I don't recall what their score was, but I think it might have only been like 1 or 2,000. The enemy team, however, was better at having the score actually distributed across their team sort of evenly, while my team, as noted by my score and Rubber Hot Dog's score, was very top-heavy. I think this is likely as a result of most of my team losing all of their potential spawns fairly early on. while the enemies, more of their team managed to hang on until the late game. And this is an issue that just exists in the game in general, where people will rush ahead and as a result lose all of their spawn points before they're able to do anything. One of the main things for me is that I want to note the battle game mode where you have a friendly cap and a hostile cap, and you can win by either obviously bleeding the enemy of their tickets, capturing their point, or just getting rid of all of the enemy spawns. I generally advise playing that game mode defensively. If my team had done a better job of playing that game mode defensively, we probably wouldn't have had such a disparity in score, and it would not have basically been left up to me and like 2 or 3 other people at the very end of the match. I'm honestly surprised we won that. And this is an issue that exists, not just at low tier. I can forgive people not being the greatest at low tier. Not so much once you start getting to like tier 3 and up. By that point, you should understand the game mechanics, and in my opinion, Battle is a game mode that is best played defensively, at least at the start. The idea being you want to try and knock out the enemy's good vehicles, because most people probably spawn their good vehicle first, as well as being able to cut down on the number of enemies. If you knock out a bunch of enemies in the first and second wave, there's going to be less enemies come the third wave, and come the third wave, you can potentially actually push and secure the objective. Depending upon how many people on your team died. And that's, I think, part of the issue is I'd have to pull up the match again, but if memory serves me correctly, I think a lot of my team tried to like beeline for the enemy cap, and they just got murdered. And either they left the game after that first death, or they tried again and got murdered a second time, and then had no spawn points, and so they left. And that's part of the issue, is you do not want to just hold a W. No matter what battle rating you're at, you really don't want to just hold W and hope for the best. It doesn't really work. Or at least it doesn't work out well. Sort of went on a tangent there, sorry about that. I just sort of wanted to go ahead and mention exactly how that battle turned out, just for anyone who happened to be curious, as well as, just kind of providing maybe some advice for how to play that game mode. But with all of that out of the way, that's going to be it for this episode of Vehicles of War Thunder. A quick reminder that I do have a Patreon, Streamlabs, and a Discord. If you find yourself you can find links to all of those down below in the description. If you want to stay up to date with the channel, particularly any changes to my schedule, or big announcements for the channel, I would highly recommend that you join the Discord. That is my go-to place for posting about that type of stuff. I don't usually remember to post elsewhere. Sometimes I do, but usually I don't. As for the Patreon and Streamlabs, if you find yourself enjoying this series, those are the 2 best ways to support the channel so I can continue to bring you this type of content, especially when a vehicle may involve trying to get my hands on a premium or event variant. And particularly in the case of the event versions, those can sometimes be pricey, and as a result, those can take a while to get out. Or rather, it can be hard to justify the cost without some sort of financial support. For those of you that don't know, the channel is not monetized. It has not been monetized for years. Ever since YouTube changed their requirement to have 1,000 subscribers and so many hours of watch time. The channel was like just shy, I think, of having the subscriber count back then. And so as a result, the channel lost its monetization years ago. So, if If you enjoy this series and you want to help me be able to continue to bring you this type of content, and you want me to be able to cover event vehicles and premiums, it's greatly appreciated if you support the channel somehow, whether it be a monthly donation via Patreon or Streamlabs, or just a one-time donation via Streamlabs that you do, periodically when the mood strikes you. It's entirely up to you, but it is greatly appreciated if you do, because it makes it so that I can actually justify the cost of some of the premium and event vehicles in the game, because some just aren't that great, for one, and then, like I said, others are just sometimes stupidly overpriced. But that is going to be it for this video. Next time we are, I think, going to go ahead and cover the Italian reserves, since I ended up doing the British tank this time. So yeah. After we do the Italian reserves, I have zero clue what we'll do because I haven't thought about it at all. Maybe I'll do the Panzer III remake. I'm not 100% certain. We'll figure it out when that time comes, but that's going to be a little while anyway. But yeah, so I'll see you all next time. Until then, like, favorite, comment, subscribe, share, and I'll see you all next time. Till then, goodbye and farewell.
Let's go! Our sector is under artillery barrage! The target has been destroyed! The enemy's getting closer to victory. The enemy tank has been destroyed! Ready to fire! Next target! Loaded! Target! Got it! The enemy tank has been destroyed!
target has been destroyed!
Need backup!
Yes! Next target!